Dan, we're here at beautiful Plum Point. Please tell me that this area has not started to be contaminated.
Unfortunately, because the Department of Defense for 2+ years, 2.5 years, has not heeded the call to stop the pollution flowing off of its base, that pollution is thankfully bypassing the city of Newburgh's reservoir, but where it's going is down through a series of creeks here to the Hudson River. And this beautiful spot, this iconic landscape, a place where fishermen come to catch striped bass, is where the pollution is flowing currently and has been for some time.
So, Plum Point is toxic.
You and I sitting here right now, we're not at risk, no. But what we don't know is what that pollution is doing to the fish. We don't know whether or how badly contaminated the fish may be because of this pollution. We know that this is also just one source of this type of contamination. These chemicals are widely in use, a number of different products. We know that because they're in food packaging, for instance, in a lot of cases, that there's some amount of it that comes through us, out through sewage treatment plants. Any waterway will have some of this in it. But we know this is a particular source that we need to address to protect Newburgh and also to protect the Hudson River.
So Newburgh gave up on reopening its contaminated water supply?
Newburgh has not given up on that. The state of New York has not given up on that. But there are concerns right now. The reservoir is not being used currently. The city of Newburgh is able to tap into the city of New York's water supply, which is this wonderfully protected system of reservoirs that serve half the state of New York, the whole city by population. The long-term solution has to include stopping the flow of pollution from the Air National Guard base so that reservoir has enough clean water, and also protecting the water, other types of pollution, preventing other types of pollution from urban runoff, stormwater, road salts, things of the more traditional nature that are still a concern for a drinking water supply.
What is PFOS?
PFOS is one of a family of chemicals. There's about 4,500 of these that have been manufactured and used for 40 or 50 years in our country. As we learn more about this chemical family, we learn that many of them, if not all of them, are toxic and cause health effects. They're virtually indestructible. So once they're out in the environment, they're there forever, essentially. They diffuse in water very well, so once they're in water, they're just there, and they flow with the water and stay with the water. In Newburgh's case, the problem was the use of firefighting foam at the Air National Guard base. And that firefighting foam is very good at putting out hot jet fuel fires, but also contains a mix of these chemicals that has now entered leaving the base, entering the water system that's reaching the Hudson, and which contaminated the city's drinking water.
So so very good at putting out the fires, but how does it get into the environment?
In this case, it was training exercises primarily and spills. So it came in a concentrated form that was then diluted for use in training exercises and to put out fires. But unfortunately, there were at least a couple of significant spills which contaminated the groundwater, got into the groundwater, and then that is then feeding out through the base's stormwater system into the streams.
So now, is it accurate that the level of PFOS is 2 times the contamination rate of what the EPA recommends?
It's a little hard to answer that question because it has been somewhat of a moving target on sort of what the safe threshold is, what we should think of as safe. I think, unfortunately, the science is pointing more and more towards there not really being a very safe level, that you can't say this much is okay, but this much is too much. It's like lead in that respect, in that you know that no exposure to lead is healthy. It can have effects on the developing brain, but we also know that it's everywhere, and we maybe can't limit it past a certain point. So I think some of these PFOS and the family of chemicals are in that similar state where we just know there's a lot of health effects that can result from these and that you shouldn't be exposed to them. The level in drinking water is also a moving target. So the state of New York is right now considering updating that level to say what the safe threshold is. And they've been a little slow about it, and we are arguing for them to meet before the end of this year, before December 25th, when everyone goes on vacation, to have a meeting and set those new levels, make recommendations that will protect people around the state.
So what's the problem? We spoke to you a few years ago.
Yeah.
The contamination starts in Newburgh, but why hasn't the state of New York been able to get a hold of this?
The state of New York has taken a number of really important actions, and I wouldn't want to suggest that they haven't acted. They have done an extensive investigation to understand where the source of contamination is at the Air National Guard base, built a filtration plant for the city to use, arranged for alternate drinking water supplies in the meantime that the city doesn't have to pay for, getting that water from New York City instead. Making available free blood testing to start to understand what the exposure has been to the people of Newburgh. So there's been a number of really important things that the state has done. Where the hang-up seems to be is the ownership and operation of the Air National Guard base. The land is owned by the state of New York. The Air National Guard is controlled by the state of New York, but it's Department of Defense work that they're essentially doing. The Department of Defense clearly has taken verbal responsibility for this contamination, but the action is lagging. So we need the federal government, the Department of Defense, to take those actions.
What has the Department of Defense said in response?
Well, the Department of Defense was largely absent from any discussions with the community for 2.5 years. Just in the last month, they finally came and hosted a meeting to talk to the community and start to set up an advisory board that will include community members so there can be a feedback loop, which is a good step. 2.5 years late, but it's a good step. They have verbally said that they want to stop that contamination from flowing off the base, and they want to make it a high priority. We need to see those words translated into action. We keep hearing excuses about the bureaucracy. Who owns this? Who has land access to that? Whose jurisdiction ends here and starts there? They need to be leaders and clear that logjam and get the work done.
Is there anything I didn't ask you that you feel we need to know?
I would say that separately from the toxic contamination from the base, this issue of general degradation of the watershed that supplies the water supply is an equally important issue, and that we're working on a very traditional development project. It's a strip mall essentially, but it will impact and has impacted one of the two streams that feeds the reservoir. So we need to protect that water supply in the long term, not just by stopping the contamination from the Air National Guard base, but restoring health to the streams that feed the reservoir so that the city of Newburgh has a good, clean local water supply